Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 1.1, Exiting the Navy, Rudderless. After exiting the military in October of 1994, I took a long, slow ride back from California, meandering through Arkansas, Maryland, Norfolk, Radford, and West Virginia. Somewhere along that journey, I saw my grandfather, possibly for the last time. That first trip as a civilian, driving cross-country in my 1994 Acura Integra GSR, was when I truly embraced what would become my life's unofficial motto, Hakuna Matata. I hadn't heard the phrase yet. The Lion King wouldn't hit my radar until later, but the philosophy was already embedded in me. It's in the getting there that counts. I remembered all those solo boat rides on Lake Tarpon in my 1996 Sea-Doo Challenger. I'd pilot out to the center of the lake, kill the engine, lie back, and just stare up at the sky. Alone. At peace. But in doing that often enough, I also realized something. Boating is boring. Unless you have a destination and people to share the ride with, it's just floating with a price tag. I eventually sold the boat, clocking 186 hours on the engine, and later the house too. Ugh. For this cross-country return to Florida, I took the southern route. From Vallejo, I dropped south to Bakersfield and then picked up Route 40 eastward. I stopped at the Grand Canyon, but somehow missed Las Vegas entirely. At the time, I had no idea what a big deal Vegas already was as a cultural icon and tourist magnet. What I did find, though, was a meditative rhythm. I drove long legs at exact speed limits with cruise control engaged, squeezing every mile out of each gallon. It was the first time in my life I saw efficiency as a form of peace. The acid, the carnival, and the roaches. My first big stop was Arkansas, where I visited my old friend Dave. Since our last hangout in Northern Virginia, Dave had toured with Fish and eventually settled down in Arkansas with Gina, one of his high school friends. They were in college, maybe in Arkadelphia. I'm not sure I ever confirmed that. I rolled off I-40 and was greeted by imposing signs listing Arkansas's severe gun laws, something I wasn't used to seeing. I arrived in the afternoon, and true to Dave's spirit, his idea for the night was this: drop some acid and hit the local town fair. That was the kind of surreal, jarring, sensory-overloaded experience only LSD can fully deliver. I hadn't touched the stuff in at least 2 years, since my California days partying with Ken, Andy, and Lou, and maybe 4 years since doing anything that wild. Dave had been living in that trailer for over a year. Just before my visit, his neighbor had shot and killed his dog and put a bullet through the window of his car. It was a grim, rednecky mess. The trailer was roach-infested, and their workaround was to sleep in tents inside their bedrooms to avoid them. Not exactly my idea of hospitality. That night, trying to sleep in the guest room, I felt a creeping sensation. When I turned on the light, I saw hundreds of cockroaches around me. That was it. I was done. I said my goodbyes, packed up, and left. I love Dave like a brother, but even brothers have boundaries. That trip, bizarre carnival, acid-laced night, and the roach apocalypse. That was enough. Radford, Kelly, and family fractures. Next stop was Radford University in Virginia to visit my cousin Kelly. She gave me directions to her off-campus housing, and I rolled in for what would be the last time I'd ever see her. Kelly and her 3 roommates, all stunning by the way, welcomed me warmly. We had a great, brief reunion, but afterward, Kelly vanished from all sides of the family, particularly our side. She was the daughter of my Uncle Steve, my father's youngest brother, who had been largely estranged from us. She felt abandoned by her dad, especially because he didn't pay child support. Her mother, who had remarried into a more financially stable household, gave her a better material life, but the rift with Steve never healed. She was my favorite cousin growing up. Steve had 2 other daughters, Heather and Holly, with Aunt Catherine, and they were lovely too. I flew up for both of their weddings on my own dime, only to never hear from them again. That hurt, especially when I needed them most. After I got into trouble years later, I wrote Uncle Steve and his family a sincere letter. When it was returned, clearly and coldly marked with a rejection, it stung more than anything. The message was unmistakable. You're not one of us anymore. To be fair, even my brother Ron has little to no contact with that side of the family anymore. It's a shame. Willful ignorance mostly. But I've forgiven them. I just wish they have shown up when it mattered. Greenbelt, grandfather, and the ghosts of racetracks. I eventually made it to Greenbelt, Maryland, where I saw my grandfather, possibly for the last time. He struggled with hearing loss, but always tried his best to connect with me and Ron. Despite the gaps, I think near the end he was proud of me. I was certainly proud to have him as my grandfather. He had that old-school hustle. For years, he ran vending machine routes, which gave him flexible hours and time to spend on his true passion, horse racing. I remember those smoke-choked afternoons at Laurel and Bowie racetracks. Me, him, and my grandmother eating packed lunches while he read the racing form like scripture. Later, he pivoted to flipping Section 8 rental properties. He'd buy, rehab, and rent out these homes for steady income. It was honest work, and he built a solid retirement out of it. Their home in Greenbelt was filled with the relics of a well-lived life. I'd get lost in the attic and basement, exploring old model planes, a childhood mini bike, and mildewy boxes of Americana. The place had a scent, dust, oil, memories, and it has never left my nose or mind. The house, the rednecks, and the rental regret. Returning to Florida, I moved back into the house on East Canal Drive, a house that my brother and I had inherited after our grandfather passed. It had a boat dock, a vacant lot next door, and the bones of a great home. We'd rented it out during our absence to members of the Jordan family, longtime friends of our grandparents. Unfortunately, the house I returned to was a wreck. The renters had treated it like a frat house. The cherrywood guest room furniture was gouged and stained. The carpets were thrashed. The kids staying there had used my old bedroom as a launching pad for chaos. It was depressing. Circuit City and the post-Navy hustle. Needing work, I signed on at Circuit City as a seasonal 12-volt sales associate. Physically, I looked sharp, thin from my obsessive dieting and workout regimen in California, but mentally, I was spinning. The job paid $6.90 an hour. My task? Convince customers to buy the knockoff stereos that paid 3 times the commission of the brand name, then pray they didn't return it. I ate lunch at the Publix across the parking lot and started dating a girl behind the deli counter. It didn't last. She went back to her supposedly abusive ex. Another girl, coincidentally named Cindy Crawford, no relation, was plus-sized and stunning. One night with her was unforgettable and confirmed that yes, size doesn't matter in that department. Sales was a grind. Managers frequently stole commissions. If I had to do it again, I would have stood up to Chris, the Jeep driving manager, who poached the best sales for himself. Eventually, the general manager told me to liquidate a discontinued line of marine audio gear. I brought it to a marina and got $75 for it. Probably a mistake. I should have lied and said I got $300. He fired me the next day. No hard feelings. St. Pete College, weed whacking, and the call from Dave. I did 1 day of lawn maintenance, wielding a weed whacker and blower in the Florida heat. Nope, not happening. That was for high school summer money, not for post-Navy life. I enrolled at St. Pete Junior College's Closterman campus, intending to finally tackle calculus. But after a few weeks, I got hired by Penn Power and dropped out. It was a rudderless time. If I had one in my life, it was Dave, and right on cue, he called. He was in Ocala, living in the woods with a Navy duffel, tarp, socks, and a spoon. I drove out there using my trusty Rand McNally and picked him up. He was beaming, content with having nothing. And the moment we got back to Palm Harn, he asked me to drop him off at the beach, just like old times in Rehoboth. And within days, he had a social life, a new girl, and I had a temporary girlfriend, her best friend. The Dave effect, in full swing. After a few months, he was gone again. That's Dave. He doesn't stay anywhere long, but while he was here, life felt anchored again.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2. Book 2, Chapter 1.2. Exiting the Navy, Rudderless. I don't recall much of my interactions with David LeMay, Lime, during our junior year, except that by its end, Dave had become one of my closest friends. And it wasn't just Dave, but also Barbara, Floyd, and eventually Adrienne, who became part of my extended family. The following summer remains one of my most cherished memories. I was heading to Rehoboth Beach for a job when Dave, true to his generous nature, handed me the keys to his Moto Marina Raven 49cc moped because he didn't need it anymore. About a month into my beach gig, I rang up Dave's house and got Barbara on the line. I told her about the character-building experience I was enjoying, spending days fabricating fence on the beach and nights playing roller hockey. Coincidentally, Dave had just totaled her car, and she figured a dose of character-building at the beach would do him good too. My boarding mother had a spare room, which was perfect timing. With hopes of steering her son straight, Barbara sent Dave to the beach that weekend. Dave didn't miss a beat on his first night. "Let's get some beer," he declared. Luckily, our over 21 roommates were more than willing to help us stockpile a treasure trove of cheap beer and wine coolers. Armed with a duffel bag, we made our way to the beach and swiftly became the heart of the beach's social whirlwind, a ritual we branded hollering. Many nights followed, spent lounging at a deserted beach house tucked between Rehoboth and Dewey Beach. That empty haven became our go-to for nights filled with drinks and camaraderie on the back porch. For 2 brief weeks in our senior year, we shared a room at RMA in the coveted former staff apartment on Band Squadron in the main building. This was a very nice room with an elbow in it, and roughly twice the square footage of the typical cadet room, and I had managed to install a mid-sized couch for optimal hanging out. When I was punished for being involved in a serious car accident and stripped of my rank, it more importantly cost me my room and my roommate Dave. For Dave, he lost the room as well, since whoever got it would choose their roommate, and it wasn't going to be him. Dave was a spirited and outspoken jokester. Once in jest, he made what many would consider a light-hearted comment about the nature of a ranking cadet's girlfriend, to which they responded by breaking Dave's jaw. This necessitated an extended convalescent leave from school and ultimately resulted in his departure from RMA in the midst of our senior year, and this certainly shaped Dave's life as well. Life of the party. The following fall, while at Frostburg State University, I got a midweek call from Dave on Halloween weekend. He was ready for a road trip, and so was I. No calendar needed. He rolled up in his mom's trusty 80s Honda Civic, and with barely $40 to our names, we set off to Columbus, where an acquaintance of his, who was also a beach girlfriend, was studying at Ohio State. We chain-smoked generic cigarettes and belted out Ball and Chain and Story of My Life by Social Distortion the entire drive. Picking up his girlfriend, we headed to Athens to dive into the infamous OU Halloween festivities, meeting her friend and soaking in the celebrations. I fondly recall him spending the last of our cigarette money on roses for his girlfriend. Other weekends found us at Radford, Virginia Tech, and ODU in Richmond, making the most of our youthful freedom. That 90s show. Those basement hangouts at Barbara's, so reminiscent of That 70s Show, with Dave hammering out tunes on the keyboard, are etched in my mind. He wrote a song named Hold On Monique, dedicated to Monique from RMA. Every time he dated a new girl, he'd change the name of the song accordingly. That futon in the basement heard plenty of our wild plans and saw a revolving door of Dave's admirers. The naked Soul Brothers band gigs, the house parties, and the girls, they all painted the backdrop of our escapades. Being the wingman to a guy like Dave meant I was never short on company, and I wouldn't trade those times for the world. On a normal, if boring afternoon, shortly after arriving in Florida, I got a call from Dave asking if I'd like to drive up to Ocala to pick him up. There was no GPS then, just the Rand McNally Road Atlas, and using that as my guide, I hit the road and drove what seemed like forever to a spot next to the woods in Ocala where Dave had been camping for some time. There he proudly showed me his vast personal possessions: a Navy sea bag, a pair of socks, a spoon, and a tarp. If you're not getting it, he had nothing and was completely and utterly content with that. He explained to me that after he finished touring with the dead or fish, he decided to hang out in Ocala for a while, where he had met a local girl. I didn't get much more about this, but I'm betting he disappeared without a word. We drove back to Palm Harbor, and just like our summer in Rehoboth Beach, the first thing he wanted to do upon arrival was for me to take him to the beach. So I dropped him off at the beach, and he spent his days traipsing around Pier 60. Inevitably, as only Dave could, he quickly developed a bustling social life, and I acquired a passing, temporary girlfriend, the best friend of the girl he met on the beach, and together we enjoyed many fun-filled afternoons of eating and other enjoyable activities. 1 Not Taken. I was lucky enough to be friends with Dave during his time with the Naked Soul Brothers and 1 Not Taken. I uploaded all of Naked Soul Brothers' demo take to MySpace when MySpace was a thing. They were since removed from their band's page on MySpace. If anyone has these songs, please share them with me. Later chapter. One of my many fond memories of Dave was building a giant sand castle on Cocoa Beach. Here you can see Adrian, Lauren, Dave, and myself on the beach. Unfortunately, I can't find the video I made of them doing the mermaid dance, a ritual which must be performed on every sandcastle to christen it and ensure it doesn't get washed away by the next tide. This trip was so enjoyable, we actually prepared by going to the hardware store and buying shovels and other construction tools necessary to build the ultimate sandcastle. Dave's life was a series of adventures from the basement to the beach, to the snowy slopes, and every road trip in between. Once, post 9/11, I visited him in Crystal City, staying in a room straight out of Being John Malkovich, tiny, with a makeshift outdoor shower and a futon precariously balanced on cinder blocks. It was the kind of place that made you appreciate the simple things, like a solid roof and indoor plumbing. Adios, muchacho. Unfortunately, I got into a bit of trouble in 2009 and as a result could no longer visit Dave in Ohio. And one of the reasons I guess it took so long to learn of his passing is that I couldn't visit due to continuing constraints. So I would touch base every other month or so, mainly because, well, the thing about being friends with Dave is that is very active. I'm sure that there are hundreds of people just like me who've been equally impacted and equally feel the loss of his kind, warm, and loving presence wherever he's gone. That's the thing. Being friends with Dave wasn't just Dave, it was his whole universe, and he shared, and everyone shared in that. He was indeed the rudder of my life. Visits with Dave and Adrian in Miami, Ohio were always a treat, filled with warmth and the kind of deep connection that only true friends share. Dave's embrace was always hearty, and every moment with him is now a treasured memory. I'm convinced that our spirits are bound to cross paths again in lives to come, and knowing Dave's out there somewhere makes the thought of my own passing less daunting. I'll see him on the other side, and I'm sure we'll pick up right where we left off. I love you, man.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 2, Pen Power. While effectively rudderless after my exit from the Navy, I developed a fairly sophisticated system for hunting down my next role, ideally as a power plant operator. Unfortunately, the mid-1990s were marked by reductions in force at many nuclear power plants, making that path a dead end. As I had done when I discovered RMA in the back pages of Boy's Life, I now turned to the classifieds at the back of Navy Times, where I found the ad that would define the next chapter of my life: Pen Power, Power Plant Startup, Operations and Support. The 813 area code caught my eye, and I made the call. On the other end of the line was Robert Tullman, who had been with the company for a few years by that point. Rob had met the rest of the PEN acronym, Parker, Ergot, and Nicholson, while working on the startup of a combined cycle power plant in Polk County. After that project, he remained in Lithia Springs, staying at Richard Ergot's home. Penn Power's founders were all former Navy nuclear-certified, Submariner-qualified ELT machinists' mates. They had met at Knowles Atomic Power Laboratory, and, while working for GE, discovered they were being significantly underpaid compared to civilian contractors. So they did the logical thing. They formed their own company and began billing GE as independent contractors, saving GE money while drastically increasing their own take-home pay. Penn Power was born. My entry into Penn Power. When I joined in early 1995, I was Penn Power's first official administrative hire, aside from Jan Ergot, who had assumed the role of comptroller early on. Rob was the vice president of sales. After our initial phone call, Rob drove out to Palm Harbor to meet me. He was impressed with my employment war room, a wall full of printouts, job applications, and progress charts that showed my meticulous search for meaningful work. He hired me shortly after. For the first month or so, Rob generously let me stay at his palatial pool-equipped home in Lithia during the work week to avoid a daily 43-mile commute. But it soon became way too claustrophobic for me. My privacy was compromised, notably during one especially awkward moment when he went through my things and discovered a men's magazine known for its barely legal content. Rather than minding his own business, he confronted me about it, claiming he didn't want his wife to find it. That was the last time I stayed over. Soon after, we secured office space on Oakfield Drive in Brandon. Together, we ordered and assembled the office furniture, installed an AT&T Partner 2 phone system, and set the foundation for what would be the central office. We hired Catherine Cast as Penn Power's first true secretarial employee. Christine and the cigarette break romance. Around this same time, I met Christine, who worked in the building and whom I often, purposely, bumped into during smoke breaks. A mutual affection developed quickly, and before long she was spending nearly every night with me in Palm Harbor. She moved most of her clothes into my closet, and we shared a lot of great moments, especially afternoons on the boat in Tampa Bay and Lake Tarpon. But Christine had an 8-year-old son from a previous relationship. I didn't fully understand it then, but I see now that I was just a kid myself, despite my house, career, and ambition. Christine was smart, beautiful, and deserved someone more mature, someone ready for the full weight of a family. I wasn't that. She had been burned in the past. Her ex, an attorney she worked with, had left her pregnant and pressured her to terminate, which she did. Her son was from a high school romance. Our relationship lasted about 8 months. While I'd been ambivalent at first, my attachment to her grew just as she started to pull away. Her departure hit me hard. In hindsight, it was all very sixth sense. The signs were there the whole time. She just started fading, returning fewer calls, distancing herself, and eventually stopped answering altogether. Her clothes were still in the closet. I tried to return them and reached out through her office. Her boss met me in the elevator lobby and in an unnecessarily crude manner let me know he was now seeing her. Thanks for the clothes. Humiliating, but I had done the right thing. Cutting my teeth in IT. Despite the emotional turmoil, this was an exciting time professionally. Every time a new recruiter or office manager joined the company, I'd set them up with a brand new Dell desktop, configure it, and maintain our growing local area network. I also began attending network education centers on Rocky Point Island in Tampa, funded generously by Penn Power. Over the next year, I completed every MCSE and Novell CNE course they offered. I maintained my full-time work schedule while studying nights and weekends. Out of everyone who attended, only 3 of us actually followed through and got certified.
This period marked my first real exposure to programming. Rob had created a clunky Microsoft Access database to manage PennPower's contractor network. It was a single, oversized form called the PennPower Lookup and Entry Form, or as I dubbed it, the PPLUE form. It only worked at 1024 by 768 resolution, which was cutting edge at the time. My machine, a Dell Latitude with a Pentium Pro, 16 megabytes video memory, and a 700 megabyte hard drive, was top tier. I later transitioned the database to SQL Server backend and even built a rudimentary dial-in web client using IIS 1.0, Internet Database Connector, IDC, and eventually Active Server Pages, VB Script. I also configured RRAS for remote access and fax routing, which replaced the receptionist's job with automated delivery. Ironically, I found out Monday morning she had been let go because of my fax routing solution, saving the company $28,000 a year. I didn't even get a bonus. The $14,000 internet bill and the fall. One expensive mistake still haunts me. We had a Farallon Netopia ISDN router that would auto-dial as soon as data packets hit it. I wanted speed and configured it for dual-channel operation. What I missed was that some numbers incurred long-distance charges. 1 month later, we got hit with a $14,000 internet bill. That earned me a very uncomfortable sit-down. Still, I had taken over the PPLUE project and poured myself into it, sometimes working 18-hour marathons. I became a student of the Access Developer's Handbook, and I was pushing what Access could do at the time. I even added code to dynamically reattach back-end tables at startup, knowing our flaky 10-base-T network couldn't be trusted. Knowledge Alliance, Network Education Centers. This one deserves its own chapter. Knowledge Alliance was where I convinced myself and everyone else that the all-you-can-learn membership model was going to change my life. For $10,000, I bought into their club membership, which gave me access to every single course they offered, as long as I could cram it into my schedule. And I did. I took every single Novell CNE course they had, even though I'd never actually pursued the certification, and every Microsoft class required to become an MCSE. The deal was simple. I paid $2,500, thanks to the trust, and PennPower picked up the remaining $7,500. They covered the cost of every exam except one. I passed them all: Windows NT Workstation, Windows NT Server, Windows 95, Fundamentals of Networking, and Microsoft Exchange Server 5.0. Exchange Server in particular struck a chord with me. It wasn't just a file share or glorified inbox. It was a real-deal server, sophisticated, capable, centralized. It opened my eyes to the idea of what true enterprise-level systems could be. The Pointer Connection. Somewhere between all those back-to-back boot camps, I met Lynette, who worked at the Pointer Institute. Through her, I got connected to an accountant client of hers, who eventually introduced me to Jeff Rahal. That single chain of introductions led to one of the most meaningful freelance development gigs of my early career, and it all started in a nondescript Tampa training center, pounding through Microsoft exam objectives. The Custom Machine, and a career shift. Once I finally earned my MCSE, Rob, my boss at PennPower, honored his promise. He handed me a blank check and said, "Get whatever machine you want." And I did. That was a real motivator at the time. It felt like a finish line. But here's the funny truth about sysadmin work. If you're good at it, the job disappears. I'd brought PennPower's network into a rock-solid, steady state. Everything worked. Nothing crashed. Nobody needed me. And I got bored. At the same time, programming had started pulling at me hard. I was fascinated by building things from scratch, making stuff that didn't exist until I wrote it. And the market for developers was on fire.
So I struck a deal with Computer Systems Group, CSG, to come on board while still keeping a foot in the door at
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 3, I Taught I Saw a Putty Tat, Circuit City Edition. Shortly after leaving the Navy and still relishing my new civilian life, I landed my first post-service job at Circuit City. Marketed as a temple of state-of-the-art electronics and staffed by experts, the reality was far murkier. Beneath its polished veneer lay a predatory commission structure where the secret to making money was not helping customers find the best product, but steering them toward the most profitable, usually the worst quality. Each product's payout was encoded in its SKU or shelf placard. If you cracked the code, you knew which ones made you real money. And unsurprisingly, the highest-paying items were often the most returned. If it felt like a scam, that's because it was. I got the idea to apply after spending a lot of downtime browsing the Solano Circuit City while stationed in Vallejo, California. The sales guys always bragged about raking it in. So once I was back in Palm Harbor, I jumped on a chance to get hired for the Christmas season. How bad could it be? Pretty bad. The whole operation was cutthroat. Managers were allowed to steal your sales on a whim. My manager, Chris, who drove a jacked-up Jeep, was infamous for swooping in and claiming big-ticket 12-volt installs. He'd literally wait until the deal was hot, then step in like it was his all along. Meanwhile, those top-paying SKUs? Pure garbage. And if the customer returned it, you lost the commission and got a tongue lashing. Some days, the stack of returns looked like a pile of TDU tubes on a Sunday. At least the TDU turds didn't argue with you at the counter. And don't get me started on the building itself. It was like working in a tech cave. No windows, no daylight, just nonstop fluorescent glare and demo unit noise pollution. Fridays and Saturdays stretched from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. It was like being trapped inside a warehouse full of blinking lights and low-grade capitalism. One day, a customer rolled in with a brand-new Mercedes-Benz C-Class, wanting a custom system install. Anyone with a brain knew the interior of that vehicle was a Rubik's Cube of over-engineering. Everyone warned him. He shrugged and said, "Go ahead." Sure enough, the install was botched. He went straight to Crown Mercedes, paid $800 to fix it, and sent the bill to Circuit City, which paid it. Smart move, if a little vindictive. Honestly, my experience working at Mercedes in Clearwater as a car washer for 6 months taught me everything I needed to know. I washed 30 to 50 cars a day and never got tipped once. Type A all the way. My last assignment at Circuit City was a classic example of why the company ultimately failed. The store manager sent me on what felt like a fool's errand to offload the marine audio equipment at a local marine supply store. He was never clear whether I was supposed to keep the proceeds or return them to the store, and frankly, I didn't have the slightest clue. From the beginning, it struck me as pointless busywork. I made an honest attempt to follow through, but in hindsight, I should have pushed back on the whole idea. Just another shining example of the kind of mismanagement that helped sink Circuit City. Jarheads, clubs, and the party palace. Despite the corporate insanity, I met some good people at Circuit City. One of them was Doug Music, a fellow veteran and former Marine. I playfully called him a jarhead, which, coming from me, was a term of endearment. Growing up, I knew people who hated Marines, like my buddy Nolan, who once flipped out on a driver on the DC Beltway just for having a USMC bumper sticker. But me, I've always respected my veteran brothers. Doug had served in Force Recon, a level just shy of Navy SEALs. He introduced me to his buddy Eric, and before long, both were living with me at 181 East Canal Drive. It brought in some rent money and gave me a couple of built-in wingmen. We hit the club scene hard around Pinellas County, especially Storman's Party Palace, which sat near St. Pete Airport off Roosevelt. It burned down years ago, but back then it was our launch pad for weekend reconnaissance missions and questionable life choices. Doug and I were close for about 2 years. We had each other's backs. I remember getting a call from the sheriff's office one night. Doug had been pulled over for DUI. Because I was able to pick him up, they let him off with a minor ticket. That wasn't rare back then.
As a vet, I've been let off more tickets than I've received. And for the record, I always drive the speed limit. Why rush when I'm in the most comfortable seat I own? Money Nat, flea clouds, and the birth of a bond. Not long before Doug moved out, he brought home a kitten he found in the middle of the street. The thing was tiny. It could fit in the palm of your hand with room to spare. I had a strict no pets policy at the time, but this little furball was just too cute to resist. A week later, I came home late from Penn Power, around 7:30 p.m., to an empty house. Doug had disappeared. His room was trashed, furniture overturned, closet emptied, everything gone, except for the kitten. I heard a small, pitiful meow from the corner and looked down to find him cowering. That's when I saw it. A dense black cloud of fleas leaping off the floor around me, like a fizzy swarm of Sprite bubbles. Thanks, Doug, not just for ghosting, but for the flea infestation too. Still, I couldn't leave the cat. I bought flea shampoo, collars, and supplies, and bathed him in the kitchen sink. As I pulled back the fur, I was horrified to see dozens of fleas casually crawling around his face like they owned the place. Nothing seemed to kill them. The vet gave me the magic bullet, Advantage, a literal nerve agent for fleas. Within 15 minutes, they were gone. Completely gone. Problem solved. I named him Money Nat, short for Putty Tat, from the Warner Brothers cartoons. For nearly 15 years, he was my companion, my shadow, and my meow conversationalist. I'm not exaggerating. We had actual vocal conversations. He'd meow back, matching my tone and timing. Maybe it was mimicry, but maybe not. Either way, we understood each other. Lessons from a cat: affection, anger, and regret. Money Nat taught me something about emotional nuance. When I'd leave for long stretches, weekends in Maryland, extended absences, he let me know he wasn't happy. Sometimes he'd jump on the bed, curl up, pause, and pee on me. The first time, I was furious. I yelled, swatted him, and stormed out. The second time, I lost my temper completely. I grabbed him, pinned his paws like a hog-tied fugitive, and tossed him against the curtained wall dividing my bedroom from the Florida room. He hit the drapes hard and landed awkwardly. His leg was injured. He limped for weeks, and I was too scared and ashamed to take him to the vet. He healed, but the guilt never left me. It's one of my greatest regrets. Despite it all, he loved me. He always slept by my head, always followed me, always forgave. During the years Anita and I were separated, I cared for her cat Araya, named after the Slayer frontman. When Anita left and didn't have a place for Araya, I stepped up and made space for both of them in my home. But when I was arrested and Anita flew down to retrieve Lauren, she left Money Nat behind. She didn't take him. My brother, who was in town at the time, couldn't step in. And just like that, Money Nat was left to the system. I've had nightmares about it ever since. He was loyal. He was mine. And I failed him. Looking back, Circuit City was less a job than a proving ground. It taught me how to survive in the civilian world, the games, the grift, the value of integrity, and the price of cutting corners. It also gave me a few unexpected gifts, a glimpse at life outside the uniform, a few friendships I'll never forget, and a tiny, flea-bitten kitten who became my family. He deserved better in the end, and he knew it. I love you, Money Nat, always.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 4, If Ifs Were Fifths. I had a redneck buddy once who used to say, "If ifs were fifths, we'd all be drunk right now." That line stuck with me because, man, there are few life decisions that haunt me more than what I'm about to describe. One of the dumbest, most life-altering choices I made during this time was deciding to sell, instead of lease, 181 East Canal Drive in Palm Harbor. This house, originally left to my brother and me by our grandparents Fancy and Vassy, was a wholly owned, beautiful residence perched on the shores of Lake Tarpon. Eventually, I bought out my brother's share and held the title myself. Unfortunately, this coincided with a major growth boom in Pinellas County, and my daily commute to Penn Power in Tampa was a grueling 43 miles, taking roughly an hour and a half each way. On top of that, the home itself was built in that old northern-style layout, highly segmented inside, with small walled-off living areas. The kitchen was boxed in, separated from the living room, which was then separate from the Florida room. It frustrated the hell out of me. All I wanted was to sit in the living room and watch a big PV exactly where the giant fireplace was. But no, instead of one open space, I had walls cutting up everything. And let's face it, who needs a massive fireplace in Florida anyway? As if that wasn't enough, the Florida room lost 2 feet of potential space because of some BS zoning restriction. There was also a bittersweet element wrapped around that place. Memories of Christine Pisanich. She was a beautiful woman, and looking back, I think I really missed out on that opportunity. Things unraveled, mostly because I refused to have unprotected sex with her. I just wasn't ready to be a father, especially not with someone who still spent significant time with her 6-year-old son's father. Yeah, right. That wasn't going to happen. To her credit, she moved on, had more kids, built a nice life for herself, and years later even wrote me a thoughtful closure letter. It was appreciated. But back in 1997, Airbnb didn't exist. Long-term rental platforms weren't what they are today, and instead of renting out the house and using the passive income to fund a new mortgage, I made one of the worst financial decisions of my life. I sold the house in 1997 for something like $115,000. Then I moved into the Paddock Club apartments. If ifs were fifths, well, you know the rest. Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 5, Pregnant. After settling into the Paddock Club in Brandon, my time with Penn Power started to unravel. Around then, I made one of many financially questionable decisions, buying furniture from Rooms to Go. No interest, no payments for 18 months, which turned into a $1,200 set costing $3,600 after all was said and done. Add to that another poor choice, putting business expenses from a Penn Power trip to Indiana on my personal credit card. That bill took 4 years to pay off. Still, it was a memorable trip. On the way up, I stopped in Chillicothe for a quick afternoon tryst with Anita. Then, nothing, for about a year. When I found out Anita was pregnant, it actually brought some peace and stability. Lauren was born on May 4, 1999, so she must have been conceived around August of '88. She was very much welcomed into this world, and we did celebrate together, if we weren't exactly prepared. Anita and I got married in November of 1998 at the Lutheran Church on Kingsway Avenue in Brandon. Why Lutheran? Because it was the only denomination that would sanction a second marriage. In hindsight, I wish we had chosen the UU Church, or even a hand fasting like my cousin's Celtic knot ceremony. Anita had a friend make the cake. It collapsed. Literally. Still, the wedding was a beautiful experience. My brother was there, along with a bunch of close friends. As for the whole life milestone overload thing, baby, marriage, house, all in 1 year, that was a lot. We bought a Lennar Pavilion Savoy model for $124,900, which, ironically, matched the remaining mortgage balance when I was arrested in May of 2009. More on that later. At the time, while Anita handled the wedding plans, I was buried in the home buying process. We even had a bachelor party. Nothing wild, but we did hit a couple of strip clubs. My brother came, along with a few of my coworkers from CSG. Felix Santos may have been there. Scott, whose last name escapes me, was definitely around. Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 6, CSG, Florida. Computer Systems Group was located on North Florida Avenue in Tampa, prime daywalker territory, before moving into an 8,500-square-foot warehouse-turned-office near the fairgrounds. That warehouse came with a $2,000 monthly electric bill, and about 9 months later, the company went bankrupt. I never even got my last paycheck. I was working there as an MCSE. I had found CSG while looking for a local IT shop, ostensibly for support, but really just to see what was out there. Around that same time, I connected with Advantage International and became friends with Trace Turvo, one of the co-owners, in 1998. CSG needed my Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer credentials to obtain Microsoft Certified Partner status. I billed $125 an hour for server work, $95 an hour for workstation support, and got paid about $25 an hour. While there, I did maintenance and disaster recovery on Exchange servers, configured OhmTool FactServe for Subway headquarters, and even cleaned up Dwayne Josephson's, the infamous CSG owner, mess after he sold a client the wrong equipment due to lack of research. This period was a turning point in my career. I had recently stabilized Penn Power's network, and my interest in programming was rapidly growing. I negotiated a transition with CSG that let me move on from Penn Power while still keeping a retainer arrangement, $250 a week to be available on call. That setup gave me the freedom to explore this exploding tech market. Inside CSG, I made some solid friendships with the techs there, most notably Felix Santos and Scott, who ended up standing in as my best man at my wedding instead of my brother. In hindsight, that was dumb. My brother was always my main dude. The company itself, Computer Systems Group, was built around its founder, Dwayne Josephson, a prolific liar and bullshit artist, probably 80% BS and 20% quasi-competency. He knew just enough to fake it. And somehow, that got him through.
Dwayne actually ran a where-res server in the shop, complete with every episode of South Park compressed into a compact, viewable format. It wasn't like the business was a front for it, but it was pretty out in the open. The shop dynamic was made more complicated by a major character conflict between me and my direct manager, Chris Barnes, who was Dwayne's wife's brother. That wife, Michelin Barnes Josephson, always seemed pretty miserable with Dwayne. His flaws were obvious to everyone, but because he owned the business, no one could tell him to his face how just dumb or dishonest he really was. As for Michelin, she'd give me back massages while I sat at my desk, totally unprompted. Of course, I was with Anita at the time, and I never pursued it, but yeah, it was weird. Conflict with Chris Barnes. While at CSG, a major source of ongoing tension was my direct manager, Chris Barnes. I never understood how he ended up in the business. He was completely clueless when it came to technology and management, yet somehow found himself in charge of people like me. To make matters more absurd, his sister, Michelin Barnes Josephson, Dwayne's wife, clearly had a bit of a crush on me, which probably didn't help my standing with him. Eventually, things came to a head, and he fired me. Ironically, about 6 months later, after Chris had been shown the door himself, I was invited back. The company admitted they had made a huge mistake keeping him around and pleaded for me to return. I did, for a while. Things went well until CSG eventually collapsed into bankruptcy. No hard feelings. It was just another chapter in the long list of life's circular jokes. Billing and exposure. At one point, I was doing 50% of all the service billing myself. They had Felix, Scott, me, and previously Dwayne, but honestly, I was the only one who really knew what he was doing. I got to drive all over Tampa Bay servicing clients and getting deeply involved with their businesses. It gave me a wide-angle view of how people got rich, like John Richardson with his lean window washing empire, or Mike LaSala, who held the regional franchise rights to Subway and was wildly wealthy as a result.
Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 7, St. Petersburg Men's Area Bible Study Group Database, From Pen Power to Private Practice. While transitioning from pen power to my next big thing at CSG, I began to take on independent software development work. One of my early projects came through Lynette at Pointer.org, who referred me to a local accountant. That accountant, in turn, introduced me to Jeff Rahal, the man behind the St. Petersburg Men's Area Bible Study Group. Jeff managed a contact and attendance database for a tightly knit network of professionals and civic-minded elites in the area, a kind of who's who of Greater St. Pete with an overt religious mission and a covert networking agenda. The application was built in Microsoft Access and tracked members, meeting attendance, and internal reporting. I charged $1,500 for over 80 hours of work, definitely underpriced in retrospect. But back then, I was excited to apply all the skills I'd developed building Pen Power's recruiting app. Technical highlights. I implemented a feature-rich front end with pop-up date filters, form combos, and customized reporting. Features that didn't exist out of the box unless you knew how to wrangle them out of the Access Developer's Handbook. The application worked beautifully and made it easy for Rahal's team to manage attendance and outreach for their weekly meetings. A peek into excess. On one of my last visits to Jeff's palatial home on Snell Island, he invited me out back to show off his latest toy, a 34-foot custom speedboat with dual chromed-out 454 marinized engines. He bragged casually that he burned through $7,500 outdrive units every other week. In hindsight, I should have taken that as a cue to multiply my rate tenfold, but I was still green. The dog bite and the dusty study. That day, his German shepherd lunged at me unprovoked, bit down, and drew blood. I waved it off without much thought, another in the long list of moments where I should have spoken up. I later asked him about investing in one of my ventures. He gave the typical evasive "I know a guy" response that amounted to nothing. Classic smoke and mirrors. Inside his massive home, everything screamed wealth.
But his study was a disaster. Entering through enormous carved oak doors, I walked into a room that was a shrine to chaos. Piles of receipts, invoices, junk mail, and tech gear everywhere. The desk was magnificent, but coated in grime. It was like he was granted one space in the house to fully be himself, and what emerged was dysfunction. The rest of the house was pristine, polished, and designed for show. But this room was his cave, and it said more about him than the rest of the house combined. The backup redemption. Despite the disorganization, I once saved his entire system after he deleted everything on his hard drive. I had previously set up a scheduled backup job using NT Backup and Windows Task Scheduler. Because he actually followed my instructions and ran the backups regularly, we were able to restore his machine perfectly, like nothing had ever happened. One of my prouder IT moments. Wealth and insecurity. Jeff had 2 daughters and drove a Hummer H1. Not the practical kind, the ostentatious military-grade behemoth. He was the kind of guy who showed off his wealth but didn't seem to enjoy it. His wife, a classic trophy wife, was always perfectly presentable, but Jeff came off like someone deeply unsure of himself. He had commissioned someone to build a massive model railroad layout, but not because he enjoyed the process. He paid for the finished product, just to say he had it. That told me everything I needed to know. The joy isn't in the display, it's in the building. My father's friend, Sam Powell, an engineer at NASA Goddard, built his entire S-gauge model railroad from scratch. The track, the scenery, the engines, everything was hand-built. And when he was done, he'd tear up a section and build it again, because that's the point.
Hashtag Kenneth Courtney's Autobiography, Book 2, Chapter 8, Chief Technology Officer, CSG, Tampa. Leadership and Responsibilities. In August of 1998, I stepped into the role of Chief Technology Officer at Computer Systems Group, CSG, in Tampa. My responsibilities were broad and encompassed internal IT development, customer support, and sales automation. I provided senior-level on-site technical support to over 100 clients and became deeply embedded in the day-to-day operations of the business. One of my core projects was the design and development of a sales management and automation platform. This was no ordinary CRM. This thing hooked into Outlook, Word, Exchange Server, and ZetaFax to create a seamless workflow for generating and tracking sales faxes. I built it using classic ASP, Visual Basic, and Microsoft Access. The tool automated everything, from fax generation to logging communications, creating a surprisingly elegant solution for an otherwise janky 1990s process. Systems Administration and ISP Ops. I was also tasked with managing DNS and mail server infrastructure, migrating the entire company from Meta IP DNS and SendMail to Microsoft DNS and Exchange Server 5.5 on Windows NT 4. These were foundational pieces in maintaining our in-house small business server-based ISP offering. This included 56K and ISDN dial-up services, ETRN mail queuing for Exchange, proxy services, and lightweight firewall management. We also got trained to deploy a next-gen IP PBX system from a promising tech startup. The margins looked great, and it felt like CSG might actually make a leap forward. New location, big overhead. Around that time, CSG relocated into a newly renovated warehouse-style building across from Net Park on 54th Avenue near the Tampa Fairgrounds and the casino. The space was expansive and modern, a far cry from the shoebox setups we were used to. They decked it out, nice carpet, proper lighting, infrastructure wiring, the whole package. Unfortunately, the overhead was just as impressive. A $1,000 electric bill, another $1,000 for internet, and tens of thousands of dollars in renovation debt. They'd financed most of the build-out on credit, hoping that scale would eventually bring profitability. They brought in a lean, sales-centric CEO that gave the operation a little more polish that needed, but even with my efforts,
at one point billing nearly 50% of all their service revenue. When the ship started sinking, it went down fast. I never got my final paycheck. Coming full circle. Despite that, I have no hard feelings. That era kept me going during a transitional period and introduced me to people I still remember 25 years later. Mike Hunter, who I'd work with again, Mike Lasala from Subway, and John Richison from Bay Area Window Cleaning. After web advertising technologies imploded in 2000, CSG welcomed me back briefly before their final collapse. And honestly, it felt like coming home. For a little while at least.